Now, an important question came up of once you have your keyframes in place, if you want to move one of those keyframes, because currently we can see that this keyframe is about in the middle. If I want to adjust its position in relation to the other keyframes, if I click in the tween span, whoops, I didn't mean to click and drag the whole thing, but if I click in the tween span, it highlights all of it. So if I try and move a keyframe, it moves the entire span, my entire tween span. That's what that whole blue chunk is called. It's called a tween span, but it moves the whole thing. And that's not what I want. And I'm going to just undo so I don't have those extra frames that will haunt me later. If I want to select a single keyframe and modify where that is in the tween span, I hold down the Command key, Control if you're working on Windows, and I click on that frame, and now it's highlighted only that frame. And because that one frame is highlighted, I can now move that frame over, and what will be very important to watch is if you look at, we have this fairly even distribution of dots. Each dot up here in the tween path represents a single frame. So if I now move this over, you will notice that in the first half of the path animation, there's now fewer dots than in the second half, because now it gets to that point much faster, and then it's going to go much slower. So now if I hit return or enter to make it play, you'll see how it almost instantaneously, as a matter of fact, it's about a quarter of a second to do the first half of that tween path. So it does it in a quarter of a second. If I put it back to the middle, now it does it in approximately half a second to get up here, because it's going approximately, well, a little more than almost a whole second, because it's going 20 frames at my 24 frames per second. So if I shorten that way down, it now goes really fast up to that point and then much slower on the second half. Or I can go the opposite direction and tighten up the second half so it goes slow in the beginning and then fast at the end. So you can adjust the timing once you have your basic animation completed. Now, a second question that has come up is how can we then extend this out or add more? Because if I click in this tween span and then grab the end, all it does is make the whole tween take longer, and it spaces out the frames proportionally. It does a proportional spacing of the frames. And if that's not what I want, if I want to add more, to be able to add more keyframes and add more movement to this animation, that's probably not going to serve my purposes. So I'm going to undo that to preserve screen real estate. And now all I have to do is click in the timeline out here and use my keyboard shortcut for adding frames, which was F5. So I'm on my tween layer, click out after it, I hit F5 to add frames, and now it added additional frames to my animation. Now that I've added those frames to my animation, any point in this segment, I can now move this object, and you will see that now my path is continuing to expand and grow itself. And now if I switch to my select tool, I can adjust the shape of that path. And I can even, for those who are conversant in it, of using the Bezier tools, the pen tools that I would use in Illustrator, I can use the convert direction tool, I can add in handles, so I can adjust the curvature the same way that I could create a very complex path. I can move my two handles, my Bezier curve handles, independently of each other. So I can just use the selection tool, or I can use my path tools. So it knows these points that are here. So I can even put a little twist in my path because I'm feeling a little bit crazy tonight, and then I can adjust these so they're a little bit different, and now we can see that our object is following a dramatically different path. Folks who decided not to show. So I'm going to make my blue circle here, so I am going to switch to a nice light blue color, and I can then draw circle. Now if I go back to C1, we'll see blue circle does not exist there, but it does exist in my library. So if I add a new layer, I can put blue circle out onto my stage. Now blue circle is right there. Now if I test my movie, we'll see that blue circle parks there and just waits. Notice blue circle is on top of the orange circle because the orange circle goes beneath or behind it. Okay, so I have my blue circle here. Now if I double click on the blue circle, you'll notice that the orange circle grayed out, and now I'm back to where it says Scene 1 blue circle, and I have my timeline which shows my artwork on frame 1. I'm going to now, through the magic of frame-by-frame animation, I am going to add a few additional frames to this circle. So I can hit F7 to insert an empty keyframe, hit B to go back to my brush tool, do a little bit of drawing, and now just repeat this process for few frames.
Are you hitting F7 every time? Or
I am hitting F7 each time to insert a new frame, and then I just draw my circle. Now I turn off onion screen so I can see what I have, and I can see that I'm just kind of, it's going to have that vibrating line kind of quality. We've probably all seen at some point in our lives animation that has that slightly agitated, wiggly line to it. Now, keep in mind when you watch this and you see, so I just drew these frame by frame by frame. Imagine when you go and watch an 80-minute long traditional hand-drawn Disney animation like Snow White or Bambi or Cinderella, and you never see any jiggly, wiggly, flickering kinds of lines on the characters, except that they are being completely redrawn in their entirety on each and every frame of the animation. So the next time you watch that, start to notice the precision of craftsmanship that has gone into producing something that has such amazing fluid visual motion. So now, saving for good measure, I can go back to scene 1. If I test my movie, now we'll see that it sits there and is moving the whole time. There's no tween, there's no anything else. It's just parked there, but it's animating because its timeline is inside the main timeline. An advantage of having done this as a graphic symbol is when I scrub my timeline, I can see that animation occurring. If I did this as a movie clip, I would have to test my movie each time I wanted to see it wiggle or move. But now, if we compare this, where see the orange here where it doesn't have that same, it's a much kind of smoother, less agitated animation quality to it, versus the blue. So what I'm going to do is I want to leave that one there. I'm going to add a new layer. On this layer I am going to put blue, and I don't want so many frames, so I'm just going to. Now to get rid of frames, you can highlight the frames and right click and choose remove frames, or do Shift F5. F5 adds frames, Shift F5 takes away. So Shift F5 gets rid of frames. Okay. So now I'm going to do a little side by side with my blue circle. So I'm going to say create motion tween. Stretch it out a little bit. And add a second layer And so that I don't have to delete frames or anything again, I can insert an empty keyframe here and now drag out the orange circle. So we have the orange circle and the blue circle. Right click to say create motion tween, so they're both tweened. And I'm going to just take and animate them both across the stage. And I think to make a little better visual impact, I'll just stretch those out like that. So now let's watch the difference. So you can see the difference between animating something with a little bit of liveliness to it and animating a single shape. There's a time and place for both inside your projects. So with the beginning part of my character in place, I can start tearing it apart and adding bits and pieces as I need them. Now you may notice there's no eyes or mouth or any of that yet, because first what I'm trying to do is just establish a basic general mass or shape for my character. I took off a little too much there with the eraser, so I can put a little bit back. Now he has no collar or neck, which is going to be slightly problematic when I try to animate or break him into pieces to work with, but everything is fixable on the computer. If we can't fix it, we're not trying hard enough. So, well, that's not a very attractive leg. Let's try again. So now that I have a basic part to work with, and I'm going to, for the purposes of the exercise this evening, not break him into necessarily all of the body parts that you may want in a full-fledged character, but just enough to start to get some of the points across. So I have a base outline. Now if I am going to work with this, it's nice to be able to get back to this color without having to click on my swatches, find the right swatch in there, because eventually they all start to look about the same, even though we look and see all those different colors, but they all really do look the same. So my recommendation is that when you're working on a character, you add in a new layer. I'm going to call this layer swatches. So now that I've added the swatches layer, I can convert this layer to a guide layer so it won't show up when I publish my movie. And now, just using my paintbrush, I can just do, whoops, go back to my paintbrush, not my eraser. And now I can put some green. Now I do it big enough so it's really easy to reach over, click on that color. I don't want to just do a tiny little stroke or stripe because it's much harder to pinpoint that with my drawing tool or my mouse later on. So now that I've done that, that's on my swatches layer. I'm going to go back to my artwork layer, choose a new color, and this is going to be my kind of base. When you choose the layer, make sure it's not selected. My artwork was selected, so if I hold down Command, it gives me my select tool. I can click off the object and let go of it, so I don't have to switch between tools that way, but I certainly could. And now that I've done that, I've selected it, grab my paint bucket, I can fill it and go, okay, there's my base color for Vegetable Man. I'm going to go back to my paintbrush with that same color and add a second swatch. But I should have put that on the swatches layer. Thank you for audience participation for correcting me so that I can now put that where it belongs. I rely on my audience.
I learned.
Here. So now to add in a highlight and a shadow, I'm going to choose my colors first. So if I want to have a darker green color, let's see, how is this one? Okay, that's going to be my shadow color. And I'm going to choose a lighter green color. Now, Whoa, that's a little more electric than I think I want. Oh, same color I already have, so we'll paint over that and go. Now, you don't have to always just use what's on the swatches palette. You can go and mix your colors in the color palette, and you can fine tune and get something that's maybe a little more of what you're looking for. Because I really wasn't finding the color, and that's going to be, I think, a little better for what I want. So now that I've done that, I can even lock that layer so I don't choose anything incorrectly. And this is a really fun technique that I learned from Animator once when I was at a user group meeting. Use the pencil tool. I'm going to switch the pencil to smooth. Now, what I can do with the pencil tool is I can decide that across, no. Again, go back to my correct layer. And now with it, I'm going to draw with the pencil tool, and so current color is red, doesn't really matter. But I can now draw across there. I can draw across there. And across there. So I'm marking out what will be my highlight areas. And now I'm going to decide that my shadow areas. Now if you notice, I'm not really paying attention to staying within the lines when I hit the end of my strokes here. Do you see how I'm going outside the lines? I was one of those children that could not color within the lines in a coloring book. Still can't. It's no fun. I like to be free. So now I have drawn and marked out different shapes that I wish to fill. So if I grab the eyedropper tool, I can click on my light color. Even though it's on a locked layer, it will still find it. And now I'm back to my original layer, and I can now click and fill with that light color. Now I can hit I for the eyedropper, choose my dark color, and I can fill with my dark color. Now here's the cool part. Those red lines, which some of you may have thought, wow, that's a really bad choice, and they're sticking out, and that's going to take eraser work to get rid of. But if I just draw some more with the pencil so that I have something connecting those, scribbling even for that matter, continue it out, switch to the select tool, double click, it selects all of the red lines in one shot, hit delete, and now I've filled in my areas with very minimal effort. So just to showcase that again, I'm going to use my paintbrush tool and choose my medium and just do a bigger shape here. And now I'm going to fill with my middle color, go back to my pencil tool here, and now if I want to just mark those areas, eyedropper, select my light, eyedropper, select my dark, go back to my pencil tool and connect those, select tool, double click, delete, and it very quickly allows you to draw your highlight areas and shadow areas, which is generally going to be much faster than trying to paint within the lines, to paint those within the outlines or the shapes that you've already indicated for your character artwork. Okay, so I've selected all of the body parts that have been converted to symbols, and if I turn off my swatches I can just hide those so I don't think that they're bothering me. But again, my swatches are a guide layer, so they will have no impact on my final file. They won't actually show up. So now I can go and start putting these body parts, reassembling him into some resemblance of his original form. Now, if I zoomed in, it would probably be a little bit easier to line things up, but I'm not that concerned with being pixel perfect at this point in the game. I'm just trying to get the body parts into a better position. Because now, if I wanted him to start doing some jumping jacks or something like that, I could do that by taking this here, this collection of body parts, and now I am going to convert this into a symbol, F8, and this will be Veggie Man. There is Veggie Man. Now, Veggie Man here, we can have many copies of Veggie Man. And I want one copy of Veggie Man where he's doing nothing. So that's what this symbol is going to be in my library. I'm going to right-click on that symbol, and I'm going to duplicate it. And this is going to be Veggie Man nodding head. Real basic animation. He's just going to kind of move his head to the beat of the music going through his produce head. So if I double click on that symbol, it brings me in and I see these these objects here. And now what I can do is I can simply add a keyframe, click on his head, click on the free transform tool right here, which allows me to do a basic movement, and then I can move the object over a little bit. So before, after. So we can tell that he is a very fresh piece of produce because he's cracking a little bit, so he's got a little snap to his neck. Alright, so knowing that, I probably will need to stretch this out, but for now I will just add another keyframe, and on this keyframe we'll put it back, rotating it back.
You could copy and paste there, Jen.
And I could copy and paste it from the original frame to that next frame if I wanted. If I wanted it to be, well, I didn't want to move the whole thing, but if I wanted it to be exactly in the same place. And now at this point I'm going to hit F6, click on it, and snap it the other way. Now I pulled it down a little bit so it closed some of the gap, so it didn't appear that he had such a hole on his neck, so we can see. I think this one needs to come down just a little bit because that's just looking a little more disturbing than I want. And what's useful, I find, when doing this is to use the keyboard keys of comma and period to navigate through my frames. And now I'll know that I've made a loop here. So this is Veggie Man nodding head. I'm going to save it before it crashes on me or does something very unhappy. And now if I go back to scene 1, now I have my original artwork, my cut up symbol on this next frame, and now what I'm going to do is just add a new layer, drag out a copy of Veggie Man nodding head, and if we realize, notice how it's able to move through 2 frames because there's 2 frames in my timeline. Now that animation was exactly 4 frames long. So if I make that layer 8 frames, we will notice it gets to play 1, 2 times during the course of that. So it plays once, twice. So his head nods here. Now we can probably see that's going a little fast. Or he's listening to some seriously speed metal kind of music. Maybe he's, heavy metal produce. He had a lot of iron in the water where he was raised, so it's made him into that speed metal kind of thing. Or I can double click on him and just take each one of these frames and extend it out a little bit. So I can click on the frame and then hit F5. I'm going to extend each one of these, so each one extends for 3 frames. Oh. Click on the next one. Click on the first one. So now it's extended it out, so it takes a little bit longer to knot. Go back to scene 1, stretch this out, give it more frames, and we'll see that he gets to now knot his head to the beat of a drum. And while he's nodding, he doesn't have to stay in place. We could create a motion tween because he is, again, a symbol. And while his arms and legs aren't moving, perhaps he is now sliding across the stage. So I just added a motion tween and then moved it at its final frame to its new ending position.